Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match. Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming, your guide to a prescription for business success. So let's dive in. Well, hey, listeners, welcome back to Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming, standing in today as the only host, but that is okay because Morgan covered me a couple weeks ago. And today we're talking about something that I think a lot of people in the helping professions maybe feel, but they don't really say it out loud. And this is really that tension between purpose and profit. So there's this kind of unspoken belief that in a lot of clinical and mental health spaces, if you're truly committed to the work, you should not be too focused on things like revenue or growth or building systems. And that business side somehow competes with the mission. And yet the reality is that organizations that cannot sustain themselves cannot serve anyone. So the question is not really whether you think about both, it is how you think about both. So I'm really excited to bring on a guest today. Dr. Elil Yuvarajan is a core faculty member in the PsyD program in Minnesota at St. Mary's University of Minnesota alongside me. So thank you, Elil. I'm very excited to have you. But he's also the founder and CEO of Stepping Stone Therapy, which is a private practice that he's built into this growing organization. So I'm really excited to have you here. Would love to hear a little bit more about you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on the show. Yes, my primary role is I'm core faculty at St. Mary's in the PsyD counseling program. I teach cognitive assessment, cognitive behavioral therapy, multicultural counseling, and do some practicum stuff within that as well. And then, as you mentioned, part of my role is running a private practice. Of course, me here in Minnesota, practice in Houston, Texas, suburb of Houston, Texas.
Awesome.
So yeah, just to tell you a little bit about myself, originally I did my master's in HR management from Purdue, primary school management, and I worked in 10 years before I made the role change to become a psychologist. So I worked pretty big with IBM, Ingersoll Rand, and which was a great experience. And moved into the field to do more helping and being able to help people in a different firm. So other site and met my wife Christy there. We stayed in Texas to start our practice together. The co-founder with me as well. And we started in 2016, so I was in business for 10 years. And right now, I primarily do most of the direct leadership, also stated with practice, and yeah, just kind of running the molos.
That is awesome. I can't even imagine. Like, I can imagine that brings different challenges, being remote, but at the same time, I think we're also used to being remote now. So maybe it's not so bad. I kind of prefer it at times, but that's just me. Well, thanks for sharing about yourself. I know you mentioned you started in kind of the HR realm and then transitioned over to becoming a psychologist. And I'm just kind of curious, what drew you into that area, into psychology, and also, if you think about what a successful life looks like in this world, what did you think it was going to look like when you decided to make that transition?
Yeah, from the beginning of going into the PsyD program, I think unlike a lot of people, I knew I wanted to go into private practices. The primary reason being I just worked for these really large billion-dollar companies where I was so tiny cog in all of it. I wanted to have all control over work that I did, the processes, how we created employees, decisions we made. Only because, I'm this large company, sometimes these decisions happen now that don't make sense for the people you work with, but you still actively support them and communicate them on those things. So I knew I wanted, and then in terms of actual what it looks like, for the most part, I figured it would be me doing therapy. That would be the extent of it. I understand. So the idea of bring back into leadership, managing people, systems and processes. I did not think that was going to be an ongoing part of my role in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I can see that. I have this similar experience in that as well, thinking, oh, I'll do therapy, and then got into it and thought, wow, I love the systems and I love the process and all of those pieces, which I think is really, really cool. Um, yeah. So I think, and I guess I'm curious, like in your grad school experience and training experiences and stuff, this tension that I brought up at the beginning between kind of, client care and profit, or purpose and profit, was that something that you ever had discussions about when you were early on into your psychology career?
Well, I'll talk about it from a grad school perspective first, which is mainly from a grad school perspective. I think a lot of the messaging around going into private practice was, you know, you only go into private practice if you're like money hungry or if you don't really care about people and you really just want to make money more than anything than being a deep therapist or good psychologist. Right. So then trying to define that on my own, that was really an important piece to kind of think about. Okay, here I am in the field as a psychologist. What is the thing that I really wanted to do for, and how do I view that from the point of how do I present myself and how my view as who really wants to help people.
Yeah. To the
Which is things I don't think we necessarily other fields don't necessarily think about as really or be like, oh, I want to make sure people know that I'm really here to help them, not in it for the money. Which I don't think I honestly like plumber that. Like, oh, do you really care about it? Like, sure. So yeah, I feel like he's different.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I always, when I would talk with like supervisees and stuff, I'd always, talk to them about, like an electrician in some ways. It's like the electrician probably, I mean, I know a few electricians and they love their job. They love what they do. They love creating things, right? All of that. And yet it's not really a question of, do I have to choose what I love to do and make money? There's not really that question of choice, because like when I was in school and even after the fact, I just remember all of my cohort members saying, well, we don't get into this field to make money. We don't get into this field to make money. And I would say, like, I refuse to believe that. I should be able to put food on my table and feed my kids and all of those things. And so I didn't see it as one or the other. It was always kind of a both and situation. And so yeah, I think that you can be committed to a mission, right? And committed to your purpose. And your business side of things, like you put on your business hat, can also be really impactful both for you and for your clients. And so I guess I'm wondering, gonna put that on your plate a little bit. What do you think about that tension that exists? Like, how do you conceptualize that? And how would that be, I guess, helpful for our listeners who maybe are wondering the same thing?
Yeah, I think when we get into this field, part of it is we have to get comfortable with the idea of making money, dealing with money, and thinking of money as part of the goal of what it is to work with you, right? In some way, we almost have to take on the idea of I'm a business person who does psychology and not a psychologist who just happens to own a business,
Right.
right? Only because I'm like working for government or working for a hospital setting or something like that. I have to think about sustaining and how much to pay other people and what to charge my clients, even though the decisions are mine. So all of those things fall under like that question of, okay, like how much do you value yourself? But also, how do you value yourself? Also, part of your responsibility is to make it accessible to people and make sure that you're not somehow creating this situation where people can't afford you who need you.
Right, right. That can be a quite a balance then too, because you think about all the people in the world, and I mean, I think you and I could both argue that everyone deserves to have, someone to talk to or help. I mean, I think about just mental health overall, and it's like, it's not that you have it or you don't. We all have mental health. It's just, to what extent do we need that support? And I think that's really important to think about too. And I talk a lot with clients that I work with about, what is your niche area? So like, who is your population? Who do you want to serve? Right. And part of that may be whether they can afford your services or if it's insurance based or self pay or whatever it might be. And those are all business decisions. And yet, I think we think about them as clinical decisions in some ways.
Yeah.
You know,
And we even kind of mix that in with ethical decisions, right? If I'm providing a service and I'm doing evaluations with an expert in a specific area and I'm charging $5,000 for an evaluation, then $10,000, whatever that amount is, that feels like a lot different. Then I need to, I'm charging too much, which that isn't responsible of me because people who literally need it. Somehow I need to be able to sacrifice or give up something to allow people to be able to go for it. Right.
yeah.
Which I don't think it's just one way or the other. It's like, I think it is that you mentioned because it isn't just, oh, I'm going to just lower my costs so then everyone's, but it also has to be like, wow, look, I'm providing a real that's valuable. And how do I value myself? And how am I okay with the idea of making money off it? Maybe at the organized call, right? One of my students is interesting. I was teaching it in my CBT class, and I was asking her, like, what is like, ask me questions about, how we engage with therapists, intake, all those things. And one of the students said to me, go, okay, I've always wanted to have a Corvette. Is it okay for me to drive to work or should I have a different car?
Oh my gosh. What a question.
Yeah, which just speaks volumes about like, okay, like I don't want to show up in a Beamer and have everyone judge me as like making money off this field in some way. Right. And I had a colleague who we were at a conference in the Dominican Republic, right? Which great destination. Yeah. She was like, I don't want my employees to think I'm just off having fun and vacationing. So I'm checking my email and responding because I want them to know I'm working and that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, this image I need to portray, and I don't want people to ever think that I'm too successful, that I'm taking advantage of people,
Right.
or that I'm in it purely for the money. And
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I think it also, like, it brings up previous episodes, like, we've talked about burnout and all of that. I mean, if you're going to a conference or you're going on vacation, I mean, what if you're checking emails, you're not setting those boundaries. I also think about, like, what are you modeling for your employees as well, you know? What are they going to think is expected of them? When in reality, as leaders, we probably would say, "You know what? Go on your vacation, shut your email off. It's okay." You know?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think that connects back to many episodes that Morgan and I have had, talking about burnout and, yeah, balance and all that good stuff. So,
yeah. And I feel like that's the piece that leads to burnout for a lot of, specifically private practice communities, is I think that they want to put themselves in a place where they don't feel comfortable talking about measuring you making money. They often end up going upside down in some way and making less than if they just had been doing individual work. And then they feel like, I'm doing all this work, not getting paid for it. It isn't worth it, but I'm providing to the communities. But this should be enough.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's hard. I get it. And you know what? It's what's hitting me right now, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on this, but it's like we're right now we are explicitly naming the tension, right? Like we are saying it out loud. And yet I think it's for a lot of people more of this like felt experience instead of it being something that they actually name and try to work through, you know, especially when you're starting out earlier in your career or whatever it might be. And again, I hear this a lot from my clients. Like, I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out. It feels uncomfortable to ask for payment when people come, to their session or to their assessment or whatever. I'm just curious if you have experiences around that yourself or with people you work with, your supervisees, your employees, whomever.
It's the water we swim in, right? We don't often name the idea of money because we don't talk about money. So then we end up kind of keeping it within ourselves, never really voicing it. Even in the training I went to Dominican Republic, you 4 people who had practically that made 7 figures and 11, right? It was so interesting that we were like talking about like, okay, let's talk about the size of his business areas we're struggling. Every single person went around the pig and said, I this is the name you practice. Here's how many clinicians I employ, and here's my biggest, right? And until I kind of like brought it up and mentioned it, right? No one had mentioned how much revenue they were making or even what a much money as a concern they were having, which is interesting to me because I'm like, I don't care if you have 700 people, like what's merely associated with it? Is that okay to talk about?
Right, right.
And so I think and then we bring into it all, the parallel to therapy where we have our own stories around money that can our families and all those things. And for me, family would get idea, but that is an associate professor at North Dakota State University in near you. And he supported all four of us on that salary. So we had to scrimp and save. My for nice share get more used by secondhand clothes, things. So I think it'd be silly of me not to recognize that those things impact how I look at money. And the fact that the practice is insured is for me, I want to make for everyone because that is something that we wouldn't have or the pure tech and private pay practice, right?
Absolutely.
So, and then I'm teaching you your practice class an elective in the fall. And the first thing we're going to start with is your money story,
Right.
right? Because with whatever goals about your private practice, what you want to help people with that, it's meaningless about thinking about that or acknowledging that first.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question for you. I'm curious, and you're in more the business related side of the field, right? I'm curious if you have a feeling around that where there's somehow that you are not seen as respected because you work the business result. You don't work with people who are suffering, quote, in the same way with anxiety. Even though, I mean, there's a significant amount of business, there's struggle and have parents who need support and all of that.
Yeah. Hey, you're turning the tables on me, Elil. Thank you. I appreciate that. I try not to interrogate people, but it's tempting because I just want to know everything. Yeah, I think just the field of psychology as a whole, and I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the podcast, but I think it's something I really want to get into, is that there's just a lot of misunderstanding, right? When we think about when people just in the world outside of the field hear therapists or they hear psychologists, like they immediately tend to think therapy, right? Sometimes people think mush psychiatrists in there as well. But what people don't realize is there's all of these other different avenues of psychology. There's academic psychologists, right? People who really focus primarily their energy in education or higher education. There's people like me who are more applied, right? And so kind of if you think about that applied umbrella, it's your sports psychologists, your industrial organizational psychologists like me, and that kind of stuff. And so, yes, the answer is it's interesting to see what happens. And because I am not a clinical or counseling psychologist, I can't take insurance, right? And so it is private pay, which then makes the business side of things really, really interesting. And to your point about like anxiety and depression, people are dealing with that all the time. Even when I'm sitting one-on-one with somebody coaching, it's anxiety about that next conversation with their boss or asking for that promotion or, what if I screw up this project? And like that's anxiety in itself, right? Now, is it getting to there? And I will be honest, like there have been times where for me it's hey, I kind of just get to the point where I say this is bordering a little bit too close to clinical work. And in which case, then I have people like you in my corner that I can say, hey, I think this would be a good path for you to choose. And I'll continue to work with you on the business side. And if you choose, you can, work with somebody else on kind of the more mental health side of the world. So I don't know if that answers your questions directly, but I do think there is a lot of confusion about that. And then when you bring that into some of those larger organizations, your $1 billion organizations or your Fortune 500, they see IO psychologist or they see a degree in psychology and they wonder, well, how is this going to apply? Right. Um, and yet I think there's so much power in being able to apply these principles and these theories to places that employ people, because ultimately that's what psychology is all about, right? Is people. So,
Yep.
yeah. I know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where people spend their time, right? For the work that you do in supporting those things and helping those people is incredibly valuable. And kind of beneficial in so many ways.
Yeah. When I think, like, people spend so much time at work, like, we think about how I mean, I probably spend equal amount of time between baseball and work, and that's a kind of a joke, but baseball is a lot, man. It's a lot. But but that's my current state, as you can tell, that's my current stressor. But, like, we spend so much time at work, and so you think about, like, just well-being overall, and it's like, if I'm not well at work, like, how am I doing in the rest of my life, you know? Um, and I think from the business psychology perspective, because, again, I'm not there working with, people on that well-being side specifically, but it's about creating systems and structures, for me, in the business psychology world, that allow people to be well, right? And so I think it's still the application of psychology, but being able to articulate that, I think, is confusing to people sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, the image is working individually with people, dealing with diagnosable ailments in some way. But there's so many ways to make difference and so many ways to help and support people in a positive way that the accent and injury.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. Okay, so I kind of want to jump to this place of, so we've talked about the tension, we talked a little bit about the experience of it. What is it going to take to shift it? Like, what do you think is needed? I know it's a big question and probably a lot of visionary thought there, but what is it going to take for us to shift from this place? It kind of almost to like a sustainability place as well. If we can sustain a practice, sustain ourselves, then we can sustain our work for people. So, how do we make that shift? And where does it start, I guess?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And I think a part of that, begins with the idea of, early on within our um, uh, uh, academic environments where we are, learning these things to be able to have open conversations about money and, because here we are, sometimes we take significant loans to get better programs and we with all these things and be able to about those things and to acknowledge those things, I think is a really important piece, right? I did also, I often find that social justice and making money are somehow like completely at odds with each other, right? Giving and marries, I think, makes a social justice based institution. But at the same time, can I be a psychologist who makes money, helps people in all the social justice initiatives, and those things exist? Obviously, can I make money? Am I adequately oppressing the masses? Therefore, I should, if I make money, therefore, what I say and what I do is worth it much.
Yeah.
So I think part of it's changing that mindset to it. And I think across the board, it's part of us recognizing and being able to talk about those things in an open and hope way. We're willing to talk about feelings and how and the family struggles we've had, things. But once we start money, people struggle. And especially people who struggle are the ones who have money or from family backgrounds where they've made money. They're impaired, right? In class and multicultural, we'll talk about socioeconomic guide. And the people who struggle the most to talk about it are the people who've had money and because in their minds, like, well, I can suffer as much because I have money. I'm not even talking to some level of social justice. They're feeling like I'm supporting social justice because I make money. I think having those boots and bringing money into it is probably one of the most important pieces of what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah, gosh, I think about that a lot because and so in my work in the business psychology world, when I'm working with private practices, usually I'm working with startups, right? Who are trying to get going. Maybe it's just them initially, maybe with the goal of scaling in the future, right? And I'll ask the question about like, well, what are your financial goals? Like, how much money do you need to make each year in order to feel like you can live the life you want to live? Like, that's a question I ask them. And every single time it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I mean, like, I don't is it 100,000? Like, I don't know. And it's so hard because it's like those are important because it doesn't have to be the North Star, but it's one spoke of the North Star, if you will, if you wanna think about it that way. And I just find it so fascinating because, like, truly, you probably know how much you pay for a mortgage or rent. You know how much your car payment is. Like, if you know what your family structure is, like, what does that actually look like? Now I'm gonna say this and I'm be transparent and vulnerable. Like, somebody asked me that long ago, and I panicked and didn't know what to do either. So it's taken time to get more comfortable with it, but it is an important question because that answer may dictate business related choices. Like, do I take insurance? Do I do self pay? Do I do a mixture of that? Do I want to work with like TRICARE or Medicare or Medicaid? Those are US based government programs for international listeners. You probably maybe have something similar. I'm not sure. But those are all big questions, and they're all foundationally, like, business decisions, and I think if we let the personal side of that get into it, we kind of do ourselves a disservice in some ways, um, because, like, I even think about, like you said, Stepping Stone is an insurance-based, right? Insurance-based clinic. Like, you can still negotiate with the insurance companies, and people feel really uncomfortable about that, you know? I think it's interesting, so,
Yeah. Well, I agree. And, in terms of like beginning of the year when everyone's debt was reset and all of a sudden people are paying not just the copay, but the full amount for whatever you've negotiated with the insurance company. I feel like a lot of therapists who work stepping down go into that struggle of, oh, uh, I know you can't afford more. Let's talk about what you can afford and how we do that. And one of the things that I'm doing is really jumping into having their own
yeah.
uh, amount that they to like help. Are they struggling? Like, that they're struggling with money. And it's like, oh, well, we have to talk about it, but it's a lot of money. And it's like, okay, like, so clearly you don't feel like you deserve that money, or maybe that you're allowed
Mm,
enough for that money. And
yeah.
right. And that also is really difficult for people to kind of understand and overcome. But yeah, the money is the lifeblood. Without that money, how do I pay my bill? But also, do I meet goals that I have? And aren't those valuable to me? Aren't those important as well? And isn't that for me to like, if I were to have a client, you give me, oh, I'm sacrificing all these things, my family can be happy. One of the first things that you can do is like, okay, well, what about you? Like, where do you follow? But we as therapists are blind to that. Like, okay, all my people who work for me are making good money, and I'm having to take money out of my 401k to make practice. And I've known multiple therapists who do that, right? But they won't cut what they paid. They won't do, uh, change anything in terms of gas structure or any of those things. Instead, they go and go until they're not able to do it anymore, which I think is a shame. You could be someone who helps people who isn't able to.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's sustainability piece. I mean, all of the like business side of things, everything is interconnected in my mind. And like, I think too that there are times where your clinical, and I talk about it as hats, but like your clinical, your counseling hat, and then your business and counseling hat, they kind of mush together, right? And so like I remember being on postdoc and my postdoc supervisor, I had a client coming in and I had a very similar experience of like, oh, I don't think they can afford it, or I don't know. And so I never pushed, and I didn't push for the copays, or I didn't push for whatever it was. And a large balance. There was a large balance on the account that ultimately impacted me. It impacted the business. There are a lot of kind of pieces. And I remember my postdoc saying, if this is happening in this setting, where else is it happening in their life? Like, this is not just a business issue. This is also like something that they need to work through, and it could potentially be an intervention. Now, that was when I was working clinically, and there's a whole lot other stuff there, but I thought was a really good lesson for me. I think both from a client perspective, but also just from a self perspective, if I'm thinking this, where else is this happening in my life? Um, and I just think that's so important. The other thing that I think just on the kind of the pay decision, like as a business, how you decide to go, one thing that I notice, and I'm curious if you hear this at all, people, a lot of people in the healthcare field feel like they can't discuss, not just that they shouldn't discuss money, but that they can't, like that they're prevented from it. And yes, there are some federal laws in the United States that, prevent it, like, antitrust laws or whatever to prevent price fixing. And that's probably way beyond what we need to talk about today. So there are some laws in existence. And that doesn't mean you can't have conversations about it. And so, like, what is true in Minnesota from an hourly rate is different than Chicago, is different from New York City, right? May even be different from rural Minnesota up north or North Dakota, to your point. Um, so I think those conversations are really important. And it doesn't mean you have to say, hey, Dr. Leal, how much do you charge per hour? But, hey, where are we, like, what do you think the range is? Like, you can keep it more qualitative. And I encourage people to do that. Have those conversations. It's not against the law.
I absolutely agree. I think people should know, like, what is an average therapist or what is an average therapy session cost, right? And most of those cash rates and things like that are on people's websites, right? Or at least should be, so people know how much, their service would cost. But what's funny, because by like insurance, right? We're contracted under insurance. And part of that is I'm not allowed to share where our reimbursement it is with other.
Exactly.
Which is like within I think the insurance and all those things that kind of tend to the fact that we're uncomfortable with money and just say, like, hey, why don't you make it easy? Talk about it.
Just don't talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So theoretically, there could be another practice that's the exact same size as ours, has the same mix of doctoral master's level people. It could be getting $20 more per session of some kind than we did, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things where you talk about it, we don't discuss it, and it's hard for people to like have those conversations.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's making me think about when someone starts like an individual, like a solo practice, right? And maybe they're not as comfortable with that business side of things, right? And then they decide, oh my goodness, I'm at capacity. I need to hire someone, right? I think for a lot of people, it's this like, okay, well, I can't take any more clients, so I must hire somebody. But then they go, well, I don't know what I'm going to pay them. Like, what do I have in reserves? Like, what strategic planning have I done? That's a lot of times where I come in as a business psychologist. Like, let's make a plan of what this actually looks like. Because again, you go back to the pay structure. If you don't have a pay structure that supports another person, right, you can't pay them, right? Or you're underpaying them to try to make sure that you can cover your overhead. And I think in sometimes it's kind of like a reactionary thing. Like I need more people. I need another person. When in reality it should be a business decision, not a clinical decision.
Yeah,
I don't know if
and
that makes
add
sense.
to that, yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that people do, which I think is awesome, but you have them actually think about it from a cost and revenue standpoint, is okay. I'm growing. I have so much demand. I need to hire another clinician. What would be fair to pay them?
Right.
And they don't even look at what is the overhead cost? What is the profitability? How much does this pay towards my uh, rent, uh, administrative things like that? And it's almost like they gauge it used to that they have money showing up in their bank account, and then they're not willing to look any more closely at
Right. Right.
that. And
Yeah.
which I agree with you. And it's like, okay, when at it, I'll put it and all of this is something that impacts the decision. And this isn't about happy. I belong to this uh, online kind of group where people, practice owners, come share their questions and ideas. And a question came up where someone said, well, he had these two clinicians that I hired for X amount of dollar per year, or like salary rate. They asked for a 3% increase. How do I, talk to them about this? Right? How do I tell them that, should I give it to them? Not. And, a lot of people are looking up like, well, what's there in your, making relative to other people? I think a person brought something like, well, how would this impact us? How possible would be if you do this? It was always the other people, the client, excuse me, the employee, and whether it's fair to them, no consideration. What do I need? What are my goals? What's the risk I'm taking to putting this business together? And what is the risk I'm taking every month? You pay rent and pay all the utilities and all those kinds of things. And we just don't talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about it kind of like reverse engineering. It's like you have to, again, and it's similar to the whole what do I want to make conversation. Like you start with where are you at, right? How much that, from for like a personal perspective, how much do I need to make each year? And then reverse engineering how I can get there. And my dad is also an engineer, just like yours. So, funny enough, yeah, I mean, it tracks. It's just in our blood, I think. But like then thinking about as a business owner that practice as well, like how much do I need to make to be able to cover my rent, my insurance, my, all of the different, expenses that you have and all of that. And there are so many great tools to be able to help you with that. I mean, I will be honest, I look at my business, I look at it at least monthly to make sure I'm on track for where I want to be at the end of the year, which seems wild maybe to some people because, well, how do you know what's going to happen? I don't, but I can try to plan for it. And I know over years of doing this kind of what the seasonal kind of fluctuations are. So it's forecasting, right? But there's so many people who are really uncomfortable with it, which I totally get. I'm a data nerd. People know that.
But even outside of the data, right? To your point, like, oh, how do I figure it out? What are the pieces? I imagine, and from just practice owners I interact with, I think a lot of them don't know the levers to pull.
Yeah.
Like if I want to get to the amount, how many sessions do I need to have per week in the business? What is the overhead cost that comes out of that? How is that going to change the result of hiring additional people? How long do we take up my people to teach? Get on around that. But, like a lot of people don't know that. So they'll know what the month is. They'll know what they're doing right now. And that's as far as it goes, if they even head to that monthly cost.
Right. Yeah, I know that, like, the question I always get from students because I teach a contemporary practice class, and so it's a little bit more like, "Where are we going in this field?" Like, "What does psychology look like?" I actually ask them the question of, like, "Who owns psychology and what is it?" Weirdly, a lot of people struggle with that question, I think because it is more broad than just clinical work, like, it's more broad. So there's a lot more to it, but one of the things that they often ask is, "Well, what's a good split?" And it's like, well, it depends on so many factors, right? Like there's not one answer. And actually it's interesting because that split idea of like I get 80% as the employee and the business gets 20, right? For those who aren't familiar with what a split is. That's not so different from positions I've been in, right? They called it something different. A lot of times it was called a draw, or whatever it might be, and then bonus eligibility and that kind of stuff. But so in the it's there is they're asking a business question from a very kind of clinical sense. I don't know how to describe it. Like it's like we need to change the question to better understand the business components that support that 20% or support that 80%. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And to understand, like, what does that actually mean for me and why is it set at that number? Right.
Right.
And you're right. It's often that people just come up with like, well, standard in this area, right? Standard for a doctorate level, standard for a master's level, this amount, da, 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 da. And it doesn't take into account like, okay, like do you have, how much physical space? Do you have, right? What are the tools and fees that you provide as a part of
Yeah, are you gonna have to buy your own couch? Like, I know that sounds stupid, but it actually makes me think about it because I had this, like, awesome conversation with my postdoc supervisor, and she had said, when she first started out, 35 years ago with her practice, she wanted to buy this new couch, but she didn't have the capital or the money to buy it, and so she figured out how many sessions she would have to have, um, taking into account what expenses she had. She's a very business-minded psychologist, clearly, but she figured out how many sessions she would need to be able to buy that couch that she wanted, right? And that was her goal. Like, that was the goal in that moment. It was like, I need X number of sessions, I can buy that couch. And again, I pass that along to my kids too. Like, how many things you have to do in order to get the thing you want, right? Um, but I think it's a good lesson, and that is a business lesson in a lot of
it?
ways.
Yeah, think about how's the work I'm doing, how much is the money I'm earning relating to the thing that I'm trying to get to, or how does that add to my this broader goal of retiring at this point in time, or buying this house, buying this car, or whatever. I remember when I was in like grad school, basically, I would always think in terms of the number of Chipotle burritos they would buy me.
Oh, heck yeah.
it's always about fruit and the point times. It's like, all right, if I work this many hours, fruit burritos, he's like, kept me. Here's where it's funny. 'Cause we can just kind of breaking up review those numbers. And I feel like we all have to, though, because money in itself feels so abstract that I know it makes it to do.
Absolutely. Okay, so most important question of the entire podcast episode. Do you still like Chipotle burritos?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So absolutely. I just don't necessarily go out and they're way more expensive than when I first started eating Chipotle burritos, first of all. But yeah, absolutely. No, I still eat them at least once, twice a week, which is
Oh my goodness. It has to go get Chipotle, I guess, because I love Chipotle too. That honey chicken right now is really good.
yes. Yeah. I like that they're trying new things as well. The one other thing I do want to talk about, just because I feel like it gets to the other side of what you're kind of bringing up, is uh, there are definitely practices and businesses in general, not even just food, that take advantage too. I think one of the things that can make our businesses or excuse me, feel more acceptable for that in some way. Often it's the people who need something or get like
Right.
right? Uh, and even from programs, they don't have as many options to be able to find in the things that program somewhere they're feel like they're definitely where people take advantage of this as well, right?
Absolutely.
And I come uh some of the some of the postdocs and people we've hired, they've talked about like some of the struggles they've had with other places where, they you can get paid and they really not a lot of break and they weren't really true like employers you they like you have to maintain this, you keep seeing this number of clients,
Right.
no option control, no any of those. All right. Also, I don't want to give you trouble just like the giant hearted people that just give away everything for free and all sorts of psychology. I think just as then, and there to find out the people who take advantage of this and take advantage of the people they bring on. And these days, whether that's because of their immigration status, it's because the need for leasing certain provision hours. I think there's that side of it too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, I mean, obviously, I think it's true in all fields. I think like there's people who are, like to your point, really in it for the heart, maybe people who aren't. Like I think there's a wide range. And I can't change those people. You can't change those people, right? So what I think about is how can we prepare our future clinicians, these people who will be employed potentially by these companies or by these practices. How can we prepare them to ask the right questions to see when those red flags are there? Like I think that's where it's like again, maybe that's a bit reverse engineering as well. Like I can't change them, but I can give you the tools. I can help you develop the tools, the business tools to advocate for yourself too, and that is true even outside of healthcare, right? Like that's true when you apply to a job at a tech company, right? It's not unheard of to, negotiate salary or ask for more days off or whatever it is. So why would that be any different in this industry? Like that's where I get caught up a little bit because and people don't know how to answer that question. It shouldn't be different, you know. Um,
Oh, I agree. And a part of that, I think, the other side of it, I think, is sometimes it's also important to recognize, and I'm going to totally sound like a boomer as I say this, but uh, people don't owe you anything. And that might not be a business that's going to give you maternity leave or paid time off if you're sick or any of those kinds of things. They don't owe. It'd be great to stay because practice centers for your employees, but no one owes you things. And what if it is you have to figure out how you're going to ask for those things or learn how to fill out those things and kind of deal with those as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It kind of it's interesting because it does like we talk a lot on this podcast about purpose and mission and vision and values and that kind of thing. And I do think that um a lot of the clients that I work with who are private practices or small group practices, they talk a lot about kind of this gap between like what they value, like what their personal values and morals are, and then what the practice needs to do. And it kind of makes me, because I was here, like when I was listening to you, I was just thinking like there's a lot of values here. Like, what do I value? Like, and there's a lot of kind of individual or unique, components there. Like we don't all value the same thing. What I will say is that with the people that I work with, in this field, just in healthcare in general, not just mental health, but in healthcare, is that most of the leaders that I work with genuinely mean what they say, right? Like just because there is a gap between what they believe, right, or what their values are, and the systems that they use, right, it doesn't mean that they don't believe that they want to do better. A lot of times I think they just don't know how, you know? And then that's why they bring in someone like me who understands both the side of what you believe and what you value and how you do it. Like, how do we make that a reality? So I guess I don't know, I'm just kind of curious. I don't even know what my question is, to be honest. I find that to be really interesting.
I agree with you. I think leadership, sometimes we treat our employees like they're from our field, like they're clients, right? Where we try to do too much for them, or, the other, we don't think of them as people and we kind of like to think of them as numbers, right? But you're right. Most people work with really good intentions and want to be helpful and want to do positive things in their communities. They value sometimes they don't know how to execute, and they don't know, how do I get these things to line up with the things that I'm doing, the way I'm communicating, the way that I'm engaging. Well, that out for me, it's going to make out my value. Right? And I think your role is so amazing. And you and I have had a lot of conversations around this where that execution is such an important thing. Right. And if I just kind of work in my own head and try to do stuff with my employees or try to do stuff with my clients, but I don't have that external perspective to kind of see, am I in line with my values and we're doing the things that I need? And sometimes we lose track of that, and then we get into a place of burnout and confusion, and we don't want what we're looking for. But we're sort of doomed to fail from the beginning. We just didn't have the perspective to really understand what people need from us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's like hearing people in the field, and I do a lot of reading and stuff too around kind of just what is psychology, where is it going? And obviously there's a lot happening in the world when it comes to insurance companies and like online therapy companies. I'm not gonna name them, but like ones where you find, you go online and then they connect you to a therapist, or the therapist works for that company. These big organizations, and there's a lot of concern in the field that private practices are going to go away. And I don't know, like okay, I'm going to give my perspective and then I want yours. Like I think that there is an opportunity for us right now in this moment to stand up and say like there is so much value in what we do, and this is how and why. Then the work that you do at Stepping Stone actually ends up helping those large insurance companies because they don't have to deal with as many hospitalizations or whatever. Like it ends up saving them money. Now that feels weird again because we don't like talking about money, but the truth of the matter is like what you do matters, and it's helpful and it's valuable, and like I know I'm getting on a probably a bit of a rant here, but I just like I think it's time for people to like come together and show that value. And my question to you then is kind of on that line, which is like, I mean, you have a really cool position, I think. Like you're training future clinicians. You're training people who may have a private practice someday or want to have a private practice. And you're working inside the system, the mental health system right now. So you're kind of like in this cool place to see where the field is right now. But I'm curious about where you think the field is going. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Or should
The first thing I'll say is our field tends to be, we tend to run a little on the anxious side of these things, right? Which I think makes it great for us to be really aware of people. But when it comes to the higher level, broader things, it can be really broad. It's not knowing when we are and all of that. I think, right, that we do provide a really valuable, and I do think some level insurance companies recognize that we reduce costs, then people don't need to be hospitalized or taken to the emergency room, right? Or they may not or into like some hires all of us apart because with recommended work that we're doing, we may be able to from, have you ahead, right? I think the difference is now, as opposed to that assumption, we're in a place that can be quantify it, and there's a lot of the values, give me value-based uh, insurance companies, right? Which is basically like you need to prove providing value to the client, right? So you need to be at what the improvement, you need to keep track of the numbers to be able to prove that, what's the level of hospitalization in the general population that has depression as opposed to the population that is in therapy. And if you capture interest versus compare, such the people who practice happiness that you can, we're in a break to prove those things, right? Which unfortunately, we'll collect a lot of that data, which again, the role that you play is huge because how people recognize the value of it, the collected in itself. But I think we're moving in directions to be able to impact everything. At the same time, always have to push back with insurance companies and say, this doesn't mean you get to tell me how to do therapy or that I need to continue my transcript of my news in order you to pay me, reimburse me for this and things like that. You've had a couple of companies reach out to us and say like, oh, if you use our AI transcription, it will be identified and we analyze that to be able to learn more about what doesn't. And there's a for me, because I'm like, okay, you're trying to create a formula for works what provides value when you don't have the full ways of measuring that and understanding what's actually adding value. Also, there's a sort of intrusiveness by Robert Liskas deciding what's needed, right? Well, I think it's a one hand, we have to measure and recognize that you have to figure out a way to quantify some of the things we do. On the other hand, I think pushing back and saying quantification, I don't know, doesn't mean that we have to allow to have that everything and be involved in what we do in order to work, right? They're useful for who will be, I don't regret getting into practice, even if we private practice primarily, like I think there's so much opportunity to continue doing good work. I think it's just a matter of attempting to figure out how do we do good work with some of these constraints that are there for us. And that's a piece we need help on, needs help on is kind of how do I still do and understand these.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, I think the field is going to, I mean, it will continue. I think it will change. I think with everything it evolves and that's just going to happen. I mean, you brought up AI, like that's, I don't know. We'll see where that goes. I mean, so many of like the systems, like the software systems people use are now integrating AI into them. So it'll be interesting. That's probably another topic.
Well, let me ask you a big question. And this may not be quick, but do you worry from your role that your role will somehow be co-opted by AI or that you will no longer have a role to play because AI can do everything you do?
That's a good question. I don't. What I see, what I believe will be the case is it will make me more efficient. I'll be able to serve more people, serve more organizations, help more people because it will allow me to be more efficient. Again, I'm not working in healthcare. Well, I am, but I'm not dealing with, you know, private health information, right? Like, so I'm not bound by HIPAA in the same way that you are with your role at Stepping Stone. But so AI is a little bit different. Like, I'll give you an example. When I work with leaders and do assessments, sometimes we incorporate like a 360-degree evaluation, right? Um, there are options for those to be digital, kind of survey like, right? They tend to be relatively expensive, and some of my clients don't want to pay for that. I don't know if they can't afford it. They just don't want to pay for it. And that's fine. So there are alternative options, which I would consider to be more of like a narrative 360. Well, previously, if you think about probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for me, that meant writing down everything everyone said. So like all 10 to 12 people, and then trying to figure out what those themes were. Now I can use AI. That makes it so much more efficient. So it's more about like, again, I say like group these into common themes, So no, I don't think it will. I think that businesses are made up of people and people want to work with people, right? How I do my work, I don't know that my client, I mean, yeah, I don't know how else to describe that. Like if I were not adding any kind of personalization or like, I think that would be a problem, but yeah, I think it'll make it more efficient.
Yeah. But your clients will also be able to tell if all you're doing is putting something into either ChatGPT, Claude, and then copying and pasting directly into whatever.
Exactly.
Your interpretation, your expertise, and your ability to then discern whether that's helpful or not, modifying it, adapting it is a part of what you do and are part of what's important. And you relate to it, right? AI can't communicate to people, hold them accountable, do those things. And
Right.
right.
Not in the same way. I actually think, you said discern. Like, I think the idea of discernment might actually be I always say, like, one of the things, like, when I'm hiring somebody, one thing I always look for is resourcefulness. Like, I think that is an important skill. Like, resourcefulness, having agency, being willing to try to, like, research it before you come and ask me about it, not because I won't help you, but because I think that provides extra, like, knowledge and learning. But I think that, like, at now that things are changing and AI is more incorporated into kind of just the world in general, that discernment piece, I think, is probably up there with my resourcefulness thing from a hiring perspective. Like, I wanna understand how you discern everything. Like, I wanna understand kind of what's going on in your mind. And again, AI can be somewhat human-like and whatever, but it's not gonna get to that nuance in the same way that we can, you know? Um, so I don't think so. But I guess we'll see. I don't know.
I think,
I like to think that if my job does somehow go away, that hopefully I'll have enough money in my bank, that I'll be able to just, like, go and sit on the beach, like, I don't know, maybe not, but that
yeah,
you know.
knowing you, Elizabeth, there's no way you would ever, for more than a day or two, be comfortable sitting on a beach and doing nothing. Just
Just
be,
you know, you told me when I went to Hawaii 2 years ago with my family over Christmas, I actually did not take my computer along. That would be the first ever vacation I've taken when I didn't bring my computer along. It was really anxiety provoking, but after, like, day 2, it was pretty good, so and I was running around after 2 kids by the ocean, so
yeah, fair enough. Distractions when it comes to the children side of things, that it's
exactly, yeah.
totally.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being willing to come on and talk about, I think, this really important topic. Is there anything else you want our listeners to know, about you, about Stepping Stone, or just in general?
No, they're out in the suburbs of Houston. So if anyone's ever seeking therapy or guide, you feel free to look us up. But really, the big, I hope people take it kind of, even if they're on smarter, the thing that, well, we all have s- like, look at like where here you're talking about, and how does that, like, I think money, maybe relationship, maybe something else. So that's one thing I'd add.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, we appreciate you. We will, for our listeners, if you're in the Houston area, you may want to check out Stepping Stone. So we will tag that on our socials so that you can find a direct link to their website. So check that out. And again, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. And thank you for the work that you do just for the communities that you serve. So,
Thank you. I really enjoyed being on here, and I really appreciate the work that you do too. So there's a huge need for it.
well, thanks very much. Well, listeners, this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation. Remember to stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries. Join us every Friday for your next Who Done It. This is Organizational Sherlocks closing today's case.